Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to the penultimate entry for our month of Povember. A really intriguing little film. I didn't know it existed until I saw it reviewed by another YouTuber called Vicky over on her channel Nightmare Maven. I'm going to link to her channel below. I would strongly urge you to check out a couple of her video reviews, because they will far more eloquently and succinctly explain to you why you should be watching her and subscribing to her than I could possibly hope to articulate. She, thank you, introduced me to Extraordinary Tales, a film I think from 2013, written and directed by Raul Garcia, an animator, Raul Garcia. Extraordinary Tales is a collection of animated shorts of the tales of Poe. The real selling point for this, and really why, if you're a fan of Poe, you can't miss out on checking this out, is the roster of talent that they've got on board, that they're able to shove like a flag at the top of the DVD. Sir Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, we'll talk about that in a bit. Julian Sands, Roger Corman, Guillermo del Toro. The next selling point for the film is that each of the shorts is done in a different animation style, so you don't get bored, it doesn't get stayed. 10 minutes or so and done, and you're on to the next one. The cover will give you an idea of the various kind of styles, as will some images on the back there. I'd love for there to be volume 2, 3 and 4 of this. What I would dearly love is if there had been more volumes. And I understand how labour intensive animation is, and I understand how difficult it is to get funding for projects like this, so it's not as if Raul Garcia can just toss off a volume 2 of this. I do understand all of this, but if the series had taken off and had room to breathe, then what we could have had was maybe fuller versions of these stories, unedited versions of these stories, because what a fan of Poe will be frustrated by is how pared down some of these stories are. Some of them ruthlessly so, right to the bone. So the stuff omitted from stories that you know so well will jump out at you as much as the stuff that's in there and the great animation that goes with it. Apart from the interstitials and the opening and closing, which we'll talk about at the end of the video, the opening story is The Fall of the House of Usher, narrated by Christopher Lee. Now, if I'm going to be really irksome about this, all the stories are paired right down to the bone to fit into the time slot necessitated. So why Garcia would create a new scene not in Poe's story to open up this segment really rankles me a little, but it's over relatively quickly, and then we're into The Fall of the House of Usher as we know and love it. I would suggest that the model for the narrator, the character, doesn't match Lee's voice. It does whip along really quickly, which is a shame. It is one of my absolute favourite Poe stories. The Madeline Usher's story gets truncated enormously. She becomes sort of a cipher. By the time the narrator gets there, Roderick Usher is already grieving. She's already dead and gone. But like I say, revel in what you've got. Some gorgeous animation moving through the house while listening to Christopher Lee's sonorous baritone voice reading Poe's deathless prose, and as the story moves on, the crack from the foundations of the house runs up through it like an urgent sort of plot device pushing you towards the end, and that's realised really quite well, and the destruction of the house at the end is realised really well. I like it as it sinks into the tarn. It's just that for the sake of time, we're not allowed to spend enough time in the house the physical house, or with the House of Usher, the descendants, Roderick and Madeline, for the end to have the effect it does in Poe's story. But you're listening to Christopher Lee narrating Poe whilst you're gliding through the Gothic House of Usher. The film opens with a real 1-2 punch. I'd have put, if I was opening with Christopher Lee, I'd keep Bela Lugosi in my back pocket for later on in the bout. But it comes out with a 1-2 sucker punch and onto the Telltale Heart, using an old radio recording of Bela Lugosi narrating the Telltale Heart. The art is all in black and white with a touch of red somewhere. The coup here, I think, is that the audio of Lugosi's narration wasn't digitally cleaned up. There's hisses and scratches and artifacts, and it warps and wobbles. That, married to these really clean, crisp black and white visuals, gives us something really eerie. If you want an idea of what the audio sounds like, and you've seen session 9, where the guy is listening to the therapy sessions on the old reel-to-reel tape that's been warped, it's like that. It adds to the atmosphere. There's an amazing sonic soundscape around Lugosi's narration. Again, fans of the story will note that it's been heavily edited down, but this time narration and illustration go together so perfectly that it's just, to be able to hear the recording is enough. After Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi, I thought, well, Jesus, you've come out with your 2 heavy hitters straight away. Are we just now going to careen towards the end? We move on to the facts in the case of Monsieur Valdemar, narrated by Julian Sands, and as it turns out, probably my favourite section of the movie. The art style of this one is very much comic book style, with the panels and the description boxes and the like. The screen as it is even given a paper texture, so it looks like the pictures are moving on old comic book paper stock. The model of the narrator, the doctor who hypnotizes Valdemar, seems consciously modelled after Vincent Price, so that's just a lovely little detail. And as the story moves into its tale of mesmerism and the world beyond death and the grey area between life and death, the colour contrast goes way up. You get your lurid greens and purples, which tell you exactly why this is drawn like a comic book style, and that it's taking its inspiration from EC Comics. It's an absolute delight. Mr. Sands up there does an admirable job. He's got a really nice rich voice. He narrates it very matter-of-factly, which is perfect for the character of the narrator, who is a doctor, who is, as the title suggests, presenting the facts of the case. There's even a theremin in it. Throw all of those elements into the cauldron and stir it up, and you've got a fantastic potion. After Valdemar comes The Pit and the Pendulum, narrated by Guillermo del Toro, which is a real coup, I think. I know del Toro's Mexican, but the timbre of his voice, the accent he has, the fact that he's Spanish speaking, and the story is being recounted by a Spaniard, he's at the hands of the Spanish Inquisition, adds it a flavour that many people, when they adapt The Pit and the Pendulum, leave out that Latin inflection. When he's strapped down and the pendulum's coming down, there's a split screen effect. One part of the screen is on the spinning blade, another is on the mechanism, and the split screen changes around. I've seen the pendulum device used a ton of times in a ton of different films, and not always Poe adaptations. It's in Saw 5, for example. Some use it like Saw 5, to get to the gore. I've never seen a version until this that really nailed down hard what's the true torture in the Poe tale, which is that the device takes so long, moves down incrementally by inches to get to you. The torture is not the being sliced in half, it's the seeing it coming slowly, inch by inch by inch, and there's nothing you can do about it. But obviously, in the world of cinema and the visuals, we can't sit there for half an hour waiting for the thing to finally descend. The answer of doing it through a split screen is the best way I've actually seen that torture device portrayed. Unfortunately, to get to that point, we have a sad situation where the animation contradicts the narration. In the cell, the narrator is in the pitch black. That's why he trips and almost falls down the pit. Now, I appreciate that you can't narrate the majority of a 10-minute slot in pitch black. It would have been a bold way to go, but there are ways to do it. There are sections in this where he's feeling his way through the walls where there's just bits of his hand and bits of the wall that are highlighted through some weak light source. There would have been a way around it, but when you've got Guillermo del Toro as the prisoner, the victim of this torture, describing how he's feeling at fingertips his way around this cell in the pitch black, and then the animation shows the guy looking up at a window, carved an iron barred window that he tries to reach, and then comes to the opposite end of the cell, to the cell door, and puts his head through the bars of the cell door, and it's a well lit cell. A real foul up from, and he's directing it, so it is from Raul Garcia. Why would you do that? I didn't like it. It's the weakest for me. And after that, we move on to, well, it's controversial. It's The Mask of the Red Death. And he's made a really controversial decision here. It's not narrated. There's one line of dialogue in it. It's read by Roger Corman, which is nice. And it's Prospero has one line of dialogue. But a decision was made to have this section completely narration free, to tell Poe's story of The Mask of the Red Death purely visually. It is gorgeous. It's animated as though it were a moving watercolor, or sometimes it looks like it's done in oils, but definitely it looks like a painting in motion. See, bizarrely, you'd have to know the story to really get the most out of this section, but it looks so good. So I don't know, I can't doubt, I do like it, but as a curiosity rather than, why get everyone else's narrated and not narrate this bit? It's strange. Probably everyone's least favourite bit of the interstitials. Between all of these stories, we have a section written purely by Garcia himself now, wherein Poe, reincarnated as a raven, is visiting the tombs of of his lost loves, and has a conversation with the personification of death. Now, there are a couple of things to say about this. The lady who voices death does an absolutely bang-up job. The guy who voices Poe is woefully miscast. And these little segments are being judged against Poe's actual words. They fall ridiculously short of the mark. If it had been me personally, I would have scoured Poe's poetry. If for the segments we were dealing with these short stories, for these conversation pieces, I would have scoured his poetry for turns of phrases and ideas and images and put those in the mouths of Death and Poe, just to keep the poetry of the man's language flowing all the way through. If you care at all about Poe, put it this way, if you're likely to recognise a picture of his gravestone, or an image, a likeness of Poe's gravestone, then I can't say that these interstitials are completely unsuccessful, because by the time it ends and wraps up, the final one is genuinely moving and touching, with his gravestone and the rose and the bottle of brandy left there. And if you know the story about the rose and the bottle of brandy that would be left on his birthday at the gravestone, the hint in this segment that it is death itself, leaving it there for, as a token for the man who loved her more than any other. It's a curiosity. Don't get crazy about how badly the stories are edited down. That's a necessity to actually get the thing made and done and out there. I'd rather we had this in the world than didn't. The Red Death is the final segment in this, and it will be the final entry for our month of November. So join me next time when we will be looking at the Mask of the Red Death.